I thought he was watching me. That's what unsettled me at first. The weight of his attention, the way my skin felt exposed even when I wasn't looking back. We were in the same room for almost an hour, surrounded by people, noise, movement. I told myself it was coincidence, that I was imagining things because I wanted to be seen. But then I realized something that changed the air in my lungs. He wasn't watching me. He was waiting. The understanding came quietly, like a door closing behind me. Every time I shifted in my chair, every time I laughed a little too loudly, every time my gaze drifted and accidentally found his, he didn't react. No hunger. No impatience. Just stillness. Control. As if he already knew how this would end and didn't need to rush me toward it. That was the moment my heartbeat stopped behaving. I was supposed to be loyal, settled, safe. I had a life that made sense on paper and a partner who trusted me without question. That trust sat on my chest like a weight I'd learned to ignore. Until that night. Until him. I remember noticing his hands first. Resting calmly, doing nothing. Not fidgeting. Not reaching. A man who didn't need to prove anything. When he finally looked at me, really looked, it wasn't like being claimed. It was like being invited. And the terrifying part was how much space he gave me. No pressure. No chase. Just presence. A quiet certainty that I would come closer on my own. I kept telling myself I could leave at any moment. That I was in control. That this was harmless. But my body was already leaning into the idea. Every breath felt louder. Every second stretched thin. The room felt smaller, warmer, charged with something unsaid. And beneath all the guilt and fear, there was a slow, aching realization settling deep inside me. Some part of me had already stepped forward. And he knew it. I tried to pretend it didn't matter. I told myself it was just a moment. One of those strange electric pauses that happen when two lives briefly brush past each other. I focused on the conversation around me, nodded at the right times, smiled when expected. But my attention kept slipping, pulled by something quieter and far more dangerous. Him. He barely moved. That's what made it unbearable. Anyone else would have leaned in, found excuses to pass by, to brush an arm, to force closeness. He didn't. He stayed exactly where he was, grounded, unhurried. As if time worked differently for him. As if he had already decided to wait as long as it took. I caught my reflection in a dark window and didn't recognize myself. My posture was different. My shoulders were tighter. My lips parted slightly like I was constantly on the edge of saying something I shouldn't. I wondered if he noticed that too. Of course he did. When our eyes met again, something shifted just a fraction. Not desire flashing openly, but acknowledgement. A silent agreement that whatever this was, it was real. My stomach fluttered, sharp and warm, followed immediately by guilt. I thought about my partner. About the way he kissed me goodbye that morning, half asleep and trusting. That memory should have anchored me. Instead, it felt distant, like a story I'd read once and forgotten the ending to. I turned my body slightly away from him, as if that could undo what had already started. But the space between us felt intentional now. Charged. Like a held breath. Then he spoke my name. Not loudly. Not to command attention. Just enough for me to hear it slip through the noise, calm and precise. The sound of it sent a shiver down my spine I couldn't explain away. I looked at him again, really looked this time. And I understood the truth I'd been avoiding. He wasn't waiting because he wasn't interested. He was waiting because he was certain. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the fear and the loyalty and the rules I'd built my life on, something fragile and reckless was already answering him back. After that night, the silence between us followed me home. I felt it in the quiet of my kitchen, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the way my phone stayed face down on the counter like it might accuse me if I turned it over. Nothing had happened. Not really. And yet my body didn't believe that lie. I kept replaying the way he said my name. Not the sound of it, but the restraint. Like he was holding something back on purpose. Like he wanted me to feel the space between us before he ever closed it. We started crossing paths more often after that. Or maybe I just started noticing. A shared hallway. A pause near the door. Moments that felt accidental but carried too much awareness to be random. Every time he gave me room. Too much room. He never reached for me. Never cornered me with words or touch. If anything, he stepped back just enough to make the choice mine. And that was what undid me. because I wanted to step forward. I'd catch him watching the floor while I spoke, listening closely but refusing to look up until I finished. When our eyes finally met, it felt earned. Earned and dangerous. My breath would catch, and I hated how obvious it was. One afternoon, we stood alone for a moment that stretched too long. The air felt thick, like it had weight. I could feel my pulse everywhere. My throat, my wrists, the place just beneath my ribs where nerves gather and wait. He smiled then. Not wide. Not triumphant. Patient. As if he knew exactly how hard I was fighting myself. I thought about all the reasons I should stop this. About the promises I'd made. The version of myself I'd worked so hard to become. But none of that quieted the ache that had started to live under my skin. I realized something terrifying in that stillness. Desire wasn't pulling me toward him. It was unfolding inside me, slowly, deliberately. And he was giving it time to bloom. The tension didn't explode. That was the strangest part. It settled instead, low and constant, like warmth beneath the skin that never cooled. Days passed and still nothing happened. No lines crossed. No excuses made. Just glances that lingered half a second too long and silences that felt intentional. I started to notice how aware I was of my own body around him. The way I held my shoulders. The way my breath changed when he stood nearby. I hated that he didn't comment on it. That he didn't take advantage. It made everything sharper. One evening we ended up alone again. The kind of alone that wasn't planned but felt inevitable. The room was dim, washed in soft light, the outside world muted. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but loud, like it was trying to warn me. He stood a few feet away. Not closer. Not farther. Waiting. I realized then that he'd been doing this from the beginning, creating space, then trusting me to decide what to do with it. My throat tightened. I wanted him to move. To break the stillness. To give me something to push against. He didn't. Instead he spoke quietly. About nothing important. A small comment. Ordinary words. But his voice was low, calm, unhurried. Every syllable landed like a touch that didn't quite make contact. I felt myself lean forward before I consciously chose to. The distance shrank, not because he stepped in but because I did. That was when he looked at me fully, no restraint this time. Not hunger. Not urgency. Permission. My breath faltered. Heat rushed through me, sudden and undeniable. I should have stopped. Should have stepped back into the safe version of myself. But all I could think was how long he'd been waiting. And how much I wanted to give him a reason to stop. I told myself I would leave. That I would say something polite, something safe, and walk away before the quiet between us became irreversible. My feet didn't listen. They stayed planted, as if the floor itself had decided for me. The air felt warmer now. Or maybe that was just me. He didn't move when I took another step closer. Didn't flinch, didn't reach. Just watched, no waited, his attention steady, unbroken. I became acutely aware of how close we were. Not touching. Almost. The kind of almost that makes your skin buzz. I could feel his breath when he spoke again. Low. Careful. You don't have to stay. The words should have freed me. Instead they made my chest ache. Because he meant them. Because he was still giving me an exit even now. I shook my head before I realized I was doing it. The silence that followed felt like a confession. Something softened in his expression. Not victory, not relief. Respect. As if my choice mattered more to him than the outcome. That realization hit me harder than any touch could have. I felt my pulse everywhere. My hands trembled slightly at my sides. I wondered if he noticed. I wondered if he was feeling this too. Or if his calm was armor he'd learned to wear well. When he finally stepped closer, it was slow. Deliberate. Enough to close the space but not enough to trap me. My breath caught, sharp and shallow. And I hated how easily my body responded. We were close enough now that the world beyond us disappeared. No guilt. No rules. Just this moment suspended. I realized then what made this so dangerous. He hadn't taken anything from me. He'd waited until I was ready to give it. The moment stretched, fragile and trembling, like it might shatter if either of us breathed too hard. I could feel the heat between us now, undeniable, alive, yet he still didn't touch me. His restraint pressed against me more firmly than hands ever could. It made my chest ache, made my thoughts blur at the edges. I whispered his name. It came out softer than I meant it to, almost unrecognizable. His jaw tightened slightly like the sound cost him something. That small reaction sent a wave through me, sudden and intoxicating. He lifted one hand slowly, deliberately, giving me time to stop him. I didn't. When his fingers finally brushed my arm, it was barely there. Just enough to send a shiver racing up my spine. The touch was careful, reverent, as if he was learning me rather than claiming me. I closed my eyes without thinking, my breath hitching at the contact. I felt exposed in a way I never had before. Not undressed, but seen. Fully. The good and the dangerous parts of me both laid bare in that quiet space. He leaned in, close enough that his breath warmed my cheek, his forehead resting lightly against mine. We stayed there, suspended, sharing air, sharing the weight of what we were doing. I should have pulled away. Instead, I tilted my face just slightly, enough to change everything. The contact that followed was soft, unhurried, and devastating. Not rushed. Not desperate. It felt like an answer to a question we'd both been asking without words. In that moment, I understood the truth completely. He hadn't been waiting for permission. He'd been waiting for me to choose myself. After that, there was no rushing. Just breath. Heat. The quiet awareness of how close we were standing to the edge of something we couldn't undo. My hands hovered for a second before finding him, like they needed permission from my mind that never came. When my fingers finally rested against his chest, I felt his heartbeat, steady, controlled, answering mine without trying to overpower it. That nearly broke me. I realized how different this felt from every reckless impulse I'd ever known. There was no urgency to take, no hunger to consume. Only a slow, deliberate unfolding. As if we were both listening for something deeper than desire, something that said now. His touch followed the line of my arm, unhurried, learning. I felt it everywhere, like my nerves were waking up one by one. I leaned into him, not because I was pulled, but because my body recognized safety in his restraint. And then the guilt crept in. Sharp. Sudden. I thought of the life waiting for me outside this room. The version of myself who believed in promises, who trusted routine, who didn't stand this close to temptation and breathe it in like oxygen. I froze. He felt it immediately. He pulled back just enough to look at me, really look. His hands fell away, giving me space again. The same space he'd always given me. The same choice. Talk to me, he said quietly. My throat tightened. I didn't know how to explain the war inside me. The longing, the fear, the shame, the way my body was begging for something my conscience couldn't bless. He listened without interrupting, without persuading, without trying to win. And that's when I understood the most dangerous truth of all. He didn't want me because I was weak. He wanted me only if I stayed honest. I don't know how long we stood there after that. Time felt different, thinner somehow, like it would tear if I moved too fast. The room was quiet except for our breathing, uneven now, honest in a way words hadn't been. I expected him to say something that would tip me one way or the other. He didn't. He waited. That patience undid the last of my defenses. Because if he had pushed, I could have blamed him. If he had persuaded, I could have hidden behind the idea that I'd been led somewhere I didn't intend to go. But he just stood there, present, open, giving me the truth of him without demand. I stepped closer. This time there was no hesitation in my body. My hands rose, settling against him with quiet certainty. I felt his breath change, felt the control in him bend, not break but soften, like he was meeting me where I stood instead of pulling me forward. When we came together again, it wasn't frantic. It was slow, grounded, devastating in its tenderness. Foreheads touching, breaths mingling. The smallest movements carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken choices. I felt everything, desire, fear, relief, grief. All of it braided together in the space between us. In that closeness, I understood what I'd been craving all along. Not to be taken, but to be trusted with my own wanting. When we finally pulled apart, nothing was resolved. My life was still waiting for me on the other side of that door. So were the consequences. So were the questions. But I left changed. Because now I knew the difference between being watched and being waited for.